In 2003, 4 years before the iPhone, Nokia announced a device that looked like the future. It was called the 7700, a wide, full-color touchscreen, no physical keypad, a true pen-driven smartphone. It was real, it was ready, and it ran on Symbian, the dominant operating system of the era. A year later it was cancelled. A successor, the 7710, did ship in late 2004, but only in tiny volumes, a curiosity rather than a statement of intent. The company that held the future in its hands looked at it, assessed it, and then quietly filed it away. This decision wasn't a single mistake. It was a symptom of a deeper illness. How does a company go from selling 40% of the world's phones to selling its entire phone business for scrap value in just 6 years? It starts by building a fortress so strong it can't see the world changing outside its walls. To understand the fall, you have to appreciate the height. Picture the world in late 2007. If you owned a mobile phone, the odds were high that it was a Nokia. In the final quarter of that year, the Finnish giant sold 40.4% of all handsets on Earth. That isn't just market leadership, it's a level of dominance that feels like a law of nature. For the full year, Nokia shipped 437 million phones. This wasn't just a business, it was a machine. A perfectly calibrated global engine designed to build, package, and deliver a phone for every person, every price point, and every market on the planet. From the bustling streets of London to the remote villages of India, the iconic Nokia tune was the soundtrack of the mobile revolution. Inside the company's glass and steel headquarters in Espoo, Finland, this success felt permanent, engineered, and utterly deserved. This dominance was built on a culture of ferocious engineering. Nokia was a hardware company to its core. Their phones were famous for two things: incredible battery life and near indestructibility. The legend of the Nokia 3310 as an unbreakable brick wasn't just a meme, it was a mission statement. This was a company that mastered global supply chains, perfected plastic molding, and could design a radio antenna that worked anywhere. They were masters of the physical object. Their power was also cemented by their deep relationships with the true kings of the old world, the mobile carriers. Companies like Vodafone, Orange, and AT&T. Nokia built hundreds of custom variants for these partners, tweaking software, changing button colors, and hitting every conceivable price point. This made them indispensable. The fortress of Espoo had high walls, built from logistics, hardware, and carrier deals. On paper, Nokia's lead in the emerging smartphone category looked just as unassailable. In 2007, their Symbian operating system powered more than half the world's smartphones. Flagship devices like the N95 were marvels of miniaturization. It had a 5-megapixel camera, GPS for navigation, and high-speed 3G data, all features the original iPhone lacked. It was marketed as the multimedia computer, a device that put the internet in your pocket. This feeling of superiority was backed by history. Nokia had been the world's #1 phone maker since 1998, a 14-year reign that made victory feel like gravity. For an entire generation of engineers and executives, winning wasn't an aspiration, it was the normal state of the world. And from that height, it was very, very hard to see the ground shifting beneath your feet. The first crack was hidden in plain sight, in the very software that powered their empire. Symbian was an engineering masterpiece for the era it was built in, an era of limited memory, slow processors, and tiny screens. It was incredibly efficient. But it was also incredibly complex, a relic written in a way that made fundamental changes a nightmare. It was designed for keypads, for navigating lists with a directional pad. The entire user interface, known as S60, was built around tiny on-screen items and deep, nested menus. When the idea of a full touch interface arrived, Nokia didn't rewrite the foundation. They tried to bolt touch onto the old architecture. The result was a user experience full of friction. You weren't gliding, you were prodding. You were hunting for tiny X buttons and confirming every action. It felt like work, not magic. The second crack was organizational. Inside Nokia, there wasn't one unified vision of the future. There were warring kingdoms. The successful and powerful Symbian division saw touch as a niche feature to be added to their existing platform. Elsewhere, a smaller, rebellious group was building something new from the ground up, a Linux-based operating system called Maemo. They created sleek, touch-native internet tablets like the Nokia 770 and N800, years before the iPad. But this team was seen as a side project, isolated from the core mobile phone business. The company's complex matrix structure encouraged internal competition over collaboration. Getting a new idea to market meant fighting a dozen internal battles for resources and approval. Instead of one company moving toward a clear goal, it was a collection of fiefdoms, each protecting its own budget and legacy. The third crack was Nokia's greatest strength, its relationship with carriers. This partnership, which had built the empire, now became a set of golden handcuffs. The carriers wanted phones they could control, phones they could load with their own branded apps and sell with their service plans. They wanted dozens of slightly different models to fill every slot in their portfolios. This demand for endless customization made a unified software reboot impossible. Every change had to be validated across hundreds of hardware variants and operator requirements. While Apple was building one phone with one operating system for everyone, Nokia was managing a portfolio of bewildering complexity. This system rewarded volume and customization, not revolutionary leaps. It was optimized for the world of 2005, and it was strangling the company's ability to compete in the world of 2008. When Nokia finally delivered its mass-market answer to the iPhone in late 2008, these cracks were painfully visible. The Nokia 5800 Express Music was a huge launch, and people queued up for it. But in their hands, the illusion shattered. It used a resistive touchscreen, which requires physical pressure, rather than the capacitive screen used by Apple, which responds to a light touch. This choice was a direct consequence of their legacy. A resistive screen was cheaper, and it worked with a stylus, which was necessary to hit the tiny interface elements inherited from the old Symbian OS. But to users, it just felt clumsy and dated. It was a half-step, a retrofitted experience that made Nokia look late to its own party. The phone that was meant to be an iPhone killer ended up being the clearest sign yet that the king was in trouble. While Nokia was wrestling with its own legacy, the rules of the game changed completely. In July 2008, Apple launched the App Store. Overnight, the phone was no longer just a communication device. It was a platform. The value was shifting from the hardware to the software ecosystem. A year later, in May 2009, Nokia launched its own Ovi store. It was too little, too late. Developers, the new kingmakers, found Symbian difficult to work with. The tools were clunky, and the process for getting an app approved was slow. They flocked to iOS and to a new open-source contender that was rapidly gaining steam: Android. Google gave Android away for free, and manufacturers like Samsung, HTC, and Motorola used it to flood every price tier that Nokia once dominated. The battle was no longer about who built the best phone. It was about who built the most vibrant ecosystem. And Nokia was losing. By 2010, the crisis was undeniable. Nokia was still selling 100 million smartphones a year, but its market share and profits were plummeting. The board made a dramatic move. For the first time in its history, they appointed a non-Finnish CEO, a Canadian Microsoft executive named Stephen Elop. Elop was brought in to be a change agent, to make the hard decisions that the entrenched culture couldn't. He quickly assessed the situation and saw three choices: stick with the dying Symbian, pivot to the unproven, internally developed memo system, or make a radical leap to an outside platform. His background at Microsoft loomed large. To critics, he was a pragmatist. To others, he would become known as the Trojan Horse. In early 2011, Elop wrote an internal memo that instantly leaked and became legendary. He compared Nokia's position to a man standing on a burning oil platform in the middle of the ocean. Behind him was a raging fire, Symbian. In front of him were the icy, unknown waters of the North Sea. He could stay on the platform and perish in the flames, or he could jump into the freezing water and take a chance on survival. The memo was a brutal public admission of failure. Days later, on February 11, 2011, Elop announced his decision. Nokia was jumping. They were abandoning their own software efforts and forming a strategic partnership with Microsoft to exclusively use Windows Phone. The goal was to combine Nokia's hardware prowess with Microsoft's software to create a powerful third ecosystem. It was a bet-the-company decision, a desperate leap into the dark. The tragedy of this decision was crystallized a few months later. In June 2011, Nokia unveiled the N9. It was the one and only phone to run memo, the successor to the Memo operating system that had been developed in-house for years. And it was beautiful. The hardware was a seamless, colorful polycarbonate shell. The software was a fluid, swipe-based interface that felt years ahead of anything else on the market. Reviewers adored it. It was proof that Nokia, when unshackled from its past, could still create magic. But it was a ghost. At the launch event, Elop himself effectively killed it, calling it a learning experience while reaffirming the company's commitment to Windows Phone. Nokia had finally built the perfect lifeboat, just moments after deciding to abandon ship. The Windows Phone gamble did not pay off. The new Lumia phones were praised for their industrial design, but they couldn't overcome the platform's fatal flaw: the app gap. Developers weren't building for Windows Phone, and users weren't buying phones that couldn't run Instagram or Snapchat. The hoped-for third ecosystem never materialized. Meanwhile, Samsung, powered by Android, was surging. In 2012, a symbolic milestone was passed. Samsung overtook Nokia as the world's largest handset vendor, ending that 14-year reign. The momentum was irreversible. Nokia's sales continued to collapse, bleeding cash and shedding tens of thousands of jobs. The fortress was crumbling. The end came on September 3, 2013. Microsoft agreed to acquire Nokia's Devices and Services unit for €5.44 billion. It was a fraction of the company's value just a few years earlier. For Finland, it was the painful end of a national icon. The deal closed in April 2014. Just over a year later, Microsoft delivered the final eulogy. It announced a $7.6 billion write-down, essentially admitting that the money it spent on Nokia's phone business was gone. It was a catastrophic failure, a public acknowledgement that the dream of a third ecosystem was dead. The name that had once defined the mobile phone was now just an accounting loss in a quarterly report. So, what is the lesson of Nokia's fall? It's that strength can fossilize into weakness. Nokia's mastery of hardware made them undervalue software. Their powerful partnerships with carriers prevented them from building a direct relationship with consumers through a unified platform. Their sheer scale and operational complexity made them too slow to pivot. They had all the pieces of the future. They had touch prototypes, Linux-based tablets, and world-class designers, but their organization, culture, and success criteria filtered these innovations as distractions. In a platform shift, the product is the ecosystem, and half steps are the same as standing still. The cost of not making a bold bet early is having to make a desperate one late. From a 40% market share to a fire sale in 6 years. That's the speed of disruption. The phone maker that could have led mobile computing filed its own future under later. The prototypes were there. The shelves were full. The conviction to bet the company never landed. If stories like this are your thing, stick with us. We do modern business as a rise, a miss, and a reckoning. Subscribe if you want more, and drop a like if this one hit the mark. There are more falls and near misses waiting on the channel. See you in the next one.